This is the premiere of All Dolphins Talk on the Our Lads Football Network with Alan Poupar, publisher for All Dolphins at Maven SI NFL Network and editor of Dolphin Digest for the past 30 years. Alan, it's good talking Miami Dolphins football with you.
Right back at you, Greg. It's nice to be talking about it days after a win, their first win of the season.
Yes. And we'll be talking Dolphins football all season long too. So I'm excited about being able to do that with you. So, and like you said, at least it's after a win. So that's good. Of course, things didn't go all too well the first couple of weeks, but it just shows you, just like last year when the team got off to such a slow start and people, they're going to go 0-16, the worst team ever. Things changed in the second half and they had a great end to the season. So things don't start off well the first couple of weeks, but then they go out on national TV. They get the good Ryan Fitzpatrick. And whenever you get the good Ryan Fitzpatrick, the Dolphins have a chance to win.
And truth be told, it was a good Ryan Fitzpatrick for the second consecutive week because he actually played pretty well in the week 2 game against the Buffalo Bills, even though that one turned out to be a loss. It was a loss that wasn't on Fitzpatrick. It was a loss on the defense, which gave up 417 passing yards against Josh Allen. In the first half against Jacksonville, it wasn't good for Ryan Fitzpatrick. It was great Ryan Fitzpatrick. I mean, he did everything for that team. Ended up setting a Dolphin single-game team record for completion percentage, going 18 for 20, minimum 20 attempts, I should add. 2 touchdown passes, 1 rushing touchdown, even caught a pass. And he joked after the game that he also did something else that was unprecedented for him. He was actually slid at the end of a scramble instead of trying to take on the defender like he always does. But yeah, it was. And then to cap it off, he had the great memorable post-game interview on NFL Network where he showed off the chest hair and with the great comment of "Sorry, ladies, I'm taken." So it was it was a glorious night for Ryan Fitzpatrick.
And very important for the team, a young team, to get a win early in the season against the Jacksonville team that had played really well the first couple of games, and they were division games. So I know going into the game, Mark Lawrence, who I handicapped games with, actually thought that he picked the Dolphins. He said, yeah, even though it's national TV game, Jags were coming off those division matchups, and now they're playing Miami, so they're going to have to come down a little bit. But the Dolphins seemed like they improved a lot in the Buffalo game. And once again, like I said, I mean, I probably will. I don't like wagering money on the Miami Dolphins myself just because of Ryan Fitzpatrick. I don't know what I'm going to get from Ryan Fitzpatrick from week to week, but it is good when he can put a couple of really good games together, and it helps out the Dolphins tremendously when he can do that. And he has a pretty healthy team as well. The Dolphins, if you take a look at there are a lot of teams out there struggling with injuries, but the Dolphins are a pretty healthy team.
They're a very healthy team. Right now they have the one issue with Byron Jones, who missed the game against Jacksonville because of a groin injury. But I did a story last week pointing out the fact that from the time the Dolphins got down to the 53-player roster limits through their third game, they did not make one single change on their 53-man roster, which is really amazing. If you want to get technical, they actually called up Tay Hayes from the practice squad on Thursday, but it did not require them doing anything else or moving a guy off the 53-man roster. So those 53 guys who made the team at the time of the final cutdown have been on the 53-man roster every single week. And again, that's unprecedented. Last year at this time, they had made, I believe it was like eight transactions, players coming, 8 players going. So this year they haven't had this issue. I mean, yeah, they've had a thing here or there. Landon Roberts had to miss the game against Buffalo because of a concussion. And then Clayton Fedulum, their free agent acquisition, that safety, mostly special teams, hasn't played all year because of a pectoral injury. But nobody's been placed on IR since Vince Beagle wound up there during training camp because of a torn Achilles. So relatively speaking, they have been fairly fortunate in terms of injuries, and knock on wood, that continues.
All right, let's start with the offense. And Myles Gaskin has taken full control as the number 1 running back on the team. He has 134 snaps. The second running back to snaps on the team is Breida with 41. So Gaskin is getting the majority of the playing time, and he's deserved it. Not only has he been the better rusher, but he's also contributed with 15 receptions. How surprised are you equally that Gaskin is taking control as the number 1 guy? It's not like he's having huge numbers, but he's the number one guy clearly. But and also how Howard has just struggled as much as he has. Uh, what's more surprising?
Yes. No. The one thing about Jordan Howard, he's got 3 rushing touchdowns in 3 games, one each game,
Okay.
so he's got that going for him. But
Yeah.
the rushing average is brutal. I mean, he's got 16 carries for 12 yards, which is, I mean, really hard to believe. I would tell you, going into training camp, the notion that it would be Myles Gaskin who would be the feature back on the Miami Dolphins would have been like completely ridiculous. But once practices started and we, the media, were allowed to watch, I would tell you that from what we saw, Myles Gaskin was the most impressive of the running backs. So that he's turned out to be the one getting the most work from that point on is surprising to an extent, but not as shocking as it would have been, say, at the start of training camp. The Jordan Howard thing is really crazy. I mean, the Dolphins went out and got him after he was been very productive both with the Bears and the Eagles last year. He's dealt with some injuries, but whenever he's been in the lineup, he's been very good. It's just not happening right now for him. Obviously, a lot of it has to do with the blocking up front. There are not a whole lot of holes through which Howard should have been able to run in those first 3 games. By the same token, he's not creating a whole lot on his own, so it's a bad
Yep.
combination. Offensive coordinator Chan Gailey explained to us basically that usually Howard runs out of the base package, which is more of a run-oriented package as opposed to the quote-unquote passing down package. But again, it's just not working for Howard right now. And until that changes, there's no reason for the Dolphins to go anywhere other than with Myles
Well,
Gaskin.
like you said, I mean, when you have an offensive line that's struggling, it's the running backs that can make their own gains, that can produce. Whereas Howard is more of a between the tackles runner, so I can kind of get why that's been an issue for Howard so far. By the way, how is Chan doing? We talked about that before the season. He hasn't been around football for a few years. So what do you notice differently about the Dolphins offense this year compared to last year with him?
Um, I mean, he not a whole ton specifically. I mean, you've seen a couple of gadget plays here and there. You had the end around with Jakeem Green against Jacksonville, but we had some of that last year. The one thing is he looked a whole lot better against Jacksonville when things are working
Yeah.
with the passing game in the first half, and that's what happens. But even with the Buffalo game, it started going a little bit better. The opener against New England was a nightmare from an offensive standpoint, and you have to attribute some of that, if not a lot of that, to the fact that Devontae Parker, who's their best offensive player, went out early in the game, and that really put a lot more pressure on everybody else on offense, and they weren't able to respond. The thing I want to point out about the running game is right now also Myles Gaskin is not necessarily putting up huge
No.
numbers. I mean, he is producing, yeah, he's producing fairly well. He had a good first half against Jacksonville. His overall numbers were not overly impressive. I believe it was 22 for 66, which is 3 yards on the nose, which is not a great rushing average. Was a factor in the passing game, but they will need for the running game at some point to start being better. That's just there's no two ways
Yeah, I
around
mean,
it.
he's averaging like 50 yards a game, and he's the number one rusher on the team. So
Yeah.
that's not going to get it done long term. But like you said, the offensive line is definitely where it starts, and it starts with every offense. And this is not a surprise. Going into the regular season, you knew that this was going to be a part of the team that was it was going to be a lot. It was going to be different from last year, no question. The talent, a little bit of an upgrade, draft and free agency, but overall, um, why do you think is there anybody that's been, let's just put it this way, disappointing?
If we're talking on the
Yeah,
offensive line, no,
anybody
I
that
wouldn't.
you
Yeah,
expected
no,
more from?
not really. And here's the thing, though: is again, we were talking about 4 new
Hmm.
starters, including 2
Yep.
rookies. Nobody in the entire NFL has that combination of 4 new starters on the offensive line, including 2 rookies. And through 3 games, yeah, the run blocking has not been very good, but the pass protection has been very good. And there have been very few penalties. I believe it's 4 total on the offensive line, including a roughness call on Austin Jackson against Jacksonville, where linebackers Miles Jack is basically hanging onto his face mask
Okay.
as he's falling to the ground. So that one is semi-understandable. So you're talking 2 holding calls on Solomon Kinley, the rookie right guard, and 1 holding call on Eric Flowers, the veteran left guard. nothing in pass protection, and the protection overall has been really, really good, and it's allowed Ryan Fitzpatrick to do what he's done the past 2 games with 2 very good outings. So overall, yeah, the run blocking could be better and should be better, but it's really, really hard to complain about what the offensive line has done so far, especially when you compare it to where they were 3 games into last season when it was a complete nightmare.
All right, now let's talk about the player on offense that has really broken out at this point in the season, and that is Mike Gesicki. And when he was drafted, seeing him at college, you knew that this was a player that had the ability to be one of the top tight ends in the NFL. And it took him a couple of years, but that's what happens. You know, he's a young player. I started to see a little bit of it last year, but he sure is coming into his own after 3 games this year, and he's having a fantastic start, averaging 14.6 a catch, which is right behind Preston Williams, who's a wide receiver.
No, that's a great average for a tight end. And as you mentioned, he really started coming along, let's say the second half of last year. Rookie season, really disappointing. First half of last year, didn't do a whole lot. Again, how much of that was caused by the fact that the entire offense was a mess? And if you notice, Devontae Parker also didn't really start coming on until the second half of last year. But Gesicki really started coming on second half of last year, 5 touchdowns in his last 6 games. Now he's got 2 in the first 3. He's got a very good receiving average for a tight end, and he's become a major factor in the red zone, something the Dolphins have not had for quite a while. And last week, here's the thing, we only had 1 reception. It was the 1 touchdown. But you have to think that he's somebody the Dolphins want to try to get involved in the game plan every single solitary week.
All right. On defense, starting up front, Christian Wilkins is a mainstay. He's a guy that you knew coming out of Clemson, championship program. He's played in a lot of big games. You knew you had something there, and he's really been the one bright spot since he's been on this team. And he actually right now might be the top young defender on the team.
You could make that. I mean, here's the thing with Wilkins is he had the 1 game against New England where he was making splash play after splash play. Hasn't had them many of those in the last 2 games. I asked actually Marion Hobby, the Dolphins defensive line coach, Tuesday morning about Wilkins' performance the past 2 games, and he made the point that when you're playing at the defensive line, especially in the scheme the Dolphins use, is the splash plays are not always going to come, and they're not always indicative of how a player is playing. Said he was been very happy with what he's gotten from Wilkins, but he's one of a few guys who have been bright spots. I'll tell you another one who actually coming off a great game, and that's Zach Sealer, guy the Dolphins got from the Baltimore Ravens late last year. Got in some action a couple of games late in the season and kind of flashed, but in the first 2 weeks of the regular season this year, didn't get a whole lot of playing time, and he wound up getting a lot of playing time against Jacksonville. And Brian Flores said that basically was a result of how well he was playing. He was earning more snaps, and he was getting more and more snaps, and really turned in a good performance. And he's a guy who looks like he could become a factor on defense.
Okay,
at some point.
Okay. Kyle Van Noy, he's pretty much lived up to what the Dolphins wanted. He's been the best pass rusher, leads the team with 2 sacks, and Lawson leads the team with 4 quarterback hits. But Van Noy doing everything the Dolphins want him to.
Had a huge game against Jacksonville. He had that really, really big play that pretty much clinched the win early in the 3rd quarter when he had the triple play with the sack, strip, fumble, and fumble recovery to set up the Dolphins' last touchdown. And that's the type of stuff you want to see from him. Did not have a good opener against his former team, New England. And again, we can say that about a lot of Dolphin players. The thing with Van Noy also is he started the season with a hand injury. He was on the injury report for the first couple of weeks. And who knows what kind of factor that played in the fact that he wasn't nearly as effective as he was starting with the Buffalo game, and then really, really took a big jump up against Jacksonville last Thursday night. And this is a guy, obviously, who can be a difference maker for that Dolphins defense. Or I should say that the hope is that he's going to be a difference maker in addition to being that veteran leader who can help everybody else get situated, get settled and everything, and set the tone for everybody.
What about the rest of the group as far as the pass rushers? I mean, you got Lawson, Emmanuel Ogbah. Statistically, it looks like they're off to a slow start. Is that the case?
It was a case until the Jacksonville game. In fact, the storyline between the Buffalo game and the Jacksonville game is what's wrong with the Dolphin pass rush and what can be done to improve it. Well, it showed up. It finally showed up against Jacksonville, and that, as much as anything else, was the biggest contributor in the Dolphins being able to get that first win. Emmanuel Agba did a good job with the pressure. I mentioned Zach Sealer. Andrew Van Ginkel had a sack late in the game. Camus Grugier-Hill had the big fourth down sack that stopped the Jacksonville drive late in the first half. We mentioned Shaq Lawson. We mentioned Kyle Van Noy. And the Dolphins ended up with 4 sacks. And even when they were not getting sacks, they were affecting Gardner Minshew. Granted, Jacksonville was missing DJ Chark, who is their best wide receiver. So if we're going to be fair, that was a factor. But even considering that, the Jacksonville passing game really wasn't a threat, and part of it was because Minshew didn't have a whole lot of time, and that's because the Dolphin pass rush finally showed up this season.
Now, you mentioned Roberts, and I know before the season began, you thought Roberts could be a big part of the Dolphins' linebacking core and the defense, but you mentioned the injury, and so far we haven't seen much from Roberts. Jerome Baker, he leads the team with 30 tackles, and he's pretty much been the workhorse out there on defense. Statistically speaking, outside the tackles, I mean, I'm sure you probably would want more from Baker, but I don't know. You tell me.
No, I mean, he's been solid. The thing is, the Dolphins have not created that many turnovers, and until the Jacksonville game, they didn't have many sacks. So if you're looking at a stat line, for example, Jerome Baker had, I believe it was 15 or 16 tackles in the opener against New England, which is great, except when you consider that pretty much all of them are coming 5-6 yards downfield. Sure. So yeah, that doesn't sound so good. So you're looking at those splash plays, forced fumble recovery, quarterback hit, sack, interception, and Dolphins didn't have a whole lot of those against New England. They got really hurt by the Patriots' running game against Buffalo. They couldn't stop Josh Allen, so the defense was a major concern through those 2 games. And against Jacksonville, you saw a really, really good all-around effort that included not only the 4 sacks, but 2 takeaways, a fumble recovery by Van Noy, and the interception by Xavier Howard late in the fourth quarter. So that's the kind of effort it's going to take. Again, it's one thing to do it against the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's another to do it against either Buffalo or against Seattle coming up this Sunday.
Before we get to Seattle, the secondary, you mentioned Howard. He's got the interception for the team. Byron Jones injury. What's going on there?
Not quite sure yet. It's too early in the week to determine whether he'll be able to go. There is no timetable. The Dolphins had a fairly light practice on Monday. He did not participate, so we'll have to see. Obviously, they can use him against that really good Seattle passing game.
And speaking of their passing game and the corners, so the rookie, does he have a nickname yet? Noah. Does Noah have a nickname?
Has one, if he has one among his teammates, we haven't heard it yet. So maybe Iggy.
Yeah,
I don't know. Iggy would be the logical one, but I don't know. I haven't heard.
So how's he doing? Because he's getting a lot of playing time.
Well, he had a really, really rough outing against Buffalo, and what happened there is the Dolphins started the game with Byron Jones covering Stephon Diggs and Xavier Howard covering John Brown, who absolutely killed the Dolphins in the 2 games they played last year. Byron Jones goes out after 4 games, and the Dolphins bring in Igbenogany and decide to keep Howard on John Brown and put Igbenogany on Stephon Diggs, and let's just say it did not work out well. Diggs had, I believe, was like maybe 143, 1 touchdown, something along those lines, and it was basically the case of an established star wide receiver taking advantage of a rookie. And there was a lot of questioning after the game and in the days after as to why the Dolphins wouldn't have just moved Howard to cover Diggs and Igbenogany to cover John Brown. To that, I would say, well, then maybe Josh Allen would have focused on John Brown instead. Whereas Howard actually kept John Brown in check most of the game except for a long touchdown late in the game. So that was a rough outing. Igbenogany came back and played every snap on defense against Jacksonville. Played really, really well. There was one play where he kind of bit the line of scrimmage or got caught picking in the backfield where he let Chris Conley run right by him for what should have been a Jacksonville touchdown, except that Minshew overthrew Conley in the end zone. But outside of that one play, he actually played very well. He's a kid who's got a lot of potential, who's going to be a good cornerback. But it may take a little bit of time because he's
Sure.
not there yet,
And
obviously.
another rookie, Brandon Jones, has been getting a decent amount of snaps as the number 3 safety behind McCain and Rowe. How's he doing? He seems like he's doing okay.
He's doing okay. Hasn't had any glaring plays, either good or bad. He got a lot of snaps in the first game against New England. Excuse me, which could have been a product of New England running so much and taking advantage of Jones's tackling ability. He didn't play quite that much against Buffalo or against Jacksonville, and again, he's played solid, but not perfect. But that's what you would expect out of a rookie.
All right, now the Dolphins get set for Seattle. So Seattle, you get the team from the furthest northwest to take on the team from the furthest southeast. So it's always interesting when that happens. Seattle actually has a very good record under Russell Wilson, and it might even be under Pete Carroll when the team travels east to play East Coast teams. They just did that against Atlanta week 1. So that isn't going to work either way. If they lose, people can't say use that as an excuse because Seattle's won a lot of games against the East Coast teams. They're 3-0. They're off to a hot start. Offensively, the passing game is just dynamic, but Seattle has they got some injuries, especially on defense. It looks like also Chris Carson may or may not play. It's possible he may play. Adams, though, looking like he may not play, which would be a big boost for Miami. Dunbar didn't play last week. So it's got the opportunity to be a high-scoring game, especially if you get the good Ryan Fitzpatrick. And I would expect this game to be a pretty close game.
Oh, no, I would too. And yeah, it should be a high-scoring game. That's all Seattle plays. I mean, all 3 of their games have been shootouts. There's no reason to think it's going to be anything but. Hey, Seattle's won, by the way, the number on them is they've won their last 8 games in the Eastern time zone. So yeah, anybody who wants to throw out the notion of West Coast team coming east to play a 1 p.m. game, that doesn't work. So that doesn't apply. Well, what's going to have to happen? Yes, logically it should be a high-scoring game. And this is a big statement game for the Dolphins. They have a chance to put themselves on the map and gain a whole lot of confidence, get themselves a 2-2 with a win against a quality team. And that would just do absolute wonders for the team in so many different ways. Obviously, the key is going to be managing the Seattle passing game. You're not going to completely shut it down. Rushing Russell Wilson is always a project because you could get close to him and he's got the mobility to get outside. And not only that, but to make plays in the passing game. And once he gets outside, you got 2 big-time receivers to worry about in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. So this is why it would be so nice for the Dolphins if they had Byron Jones available, but that's something we may not know until later in the week. Either way, it certainly presents itself as quite a challenge for the Dolphins.
If Jones doesn't play, how do you think which receiver do you think Howard then plays?
Well, logic says since Tyler Lockett lines up in the slot more often than not, logic says that Howard would line up outside against Metcalf. Because he'd be the guy to worry about outside. But also the Seahawks also have Greg Olsen lining up at tight end. He's another guy who could be a problem, even though he doesn't have big numbers yet, but he certainly has the ability to be a problem. And then the question would be, who would line up if the Dolphins decide to go man-to-man against Lockett? Who would go as their slot cornerback? They've tried several different players in that role so far this year with varying degrees of success or lack thereof at times. Certainly against Buffalo, it didn't work out well, but the guys who've played there have been Nick Needham against Buffalo and then wound up not playing a snap against Jacksonville. They've had Jamal Perry play there quite a bit as well. And then last week I mentioned they brought up Tay Hayes from the practice squad. He got, I believe it was somewhere between 15 and 20 snaps as the nickel corner, and he's a guy who's got some potential. So could be a combination of those guys, but the Dolphins will have to figure out a way to cover Tyler Lockett out of the slot. That's for sure.
By the way, I meant to ask you, how's Preston Williams doing?
Yeah, it's been slow coming in. I mean, obviously he had the great rookie year last year until he tore his ACL in November, and then this year he started off with very few catches in relation to the number of targets he had. I don't remember what it was. It may have been 13 targets, 3 catches or 4 catches in the first 2 games. Though it should be pointed out that against New England, once Parker left the game, the Patriots put Stephon Gilmore on him quite a bit. And then Buffalo had Tre'Davious White on him quite a bit. And you're looking right there at 2 of the top cornerbacks in the NFL. So I don't remember if Preston caught a pass last week other than his one touchdown at the end of the Dolphins' first drive. So it's been a little bit of slow coming for Preston Williams as he works his way back from the injury. But once he gets back to where he was last year, that's another weapon the Dolphins have, along with Devontae Parker and Mike Gesicki.
So if there are fantasy football fans listening out there, and Preston Williams is sitting on in free agency land, would you recommend them if they need a backup, somebody to keep an eye on? Maybe he'll start working himself into starter role down the road, fantasy, or no? Wait till next year.
No, he's worth a shot. It depends on who else is out there available. But again, he's off to a bit of a slow start, and it's clear that the key guys have been Parker and Gesicki, and Isaiah Ford's also getting a lot of catches as the third wide receiver. But there is a possibility for Williams to pick up the numbers at some point. Again, depends who else is out there available before I advise any fantasy players to pick him up.
All right. By the way, the fans, tell us what are we going to expect? What's the number going to be like? Is it still 15? Well, is that what it is? 15,000?
It's 13,000, which is about 20% of capacity at Hard Rock Stadium. That's a number that they're operating under, at least for the second game, as well as they did in the opener against Buffalo. I don't quite believe they reached 13,000 in that first game, though. Don't quote me on that, but that's the number they're operating with.
Okay,
right now.
And Florida's wide open. At least that's what we're hearing. For people who don't live in Florida, that's a promising thing, of course. So there is a chance that more fans will be able to attend games soon.
That's a possibility. Everything's in flux. I know the governor of Florida is real gung-ho about getting things back to normal. Unfortunately, we saw some scenes of partiers packing bars and jamming bars once the okay was given. I believe it was Friday. So knock on wood, that does not result in a problem down the line. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah, it's that's the unfortunate thing about when the average person hears these directives and they're like, well, why can't they just let us open things up again? I know how to take care of myself. I know how to stay within 6 feet and follow all the rules. Well, it's not about you. It's about the knuckleheads that don't listen. And that's the unfortunate part.
And there are too many of those, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. They screw it up for the rest of us.
Correct. And from where I sit, it's always better to err on the side of caution. I understand people want to go to the games and all that. That's fine. I mean, no problem there. But I think the number one priority, obviously, should be to deal with this situation.
And 13,000, and whether they go to 20 or 25, that's still okay. I don't think it's to me, even if they never get to anywhere close to full capacity by the end of the year, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, as long as you can get to maybe half full by the end of the season, I think that's fine. I mean, you look at some of these stadiums, especially the ones in California, they may not ever have anybody in the stadiums for the rest of the year. So I think anybody in Miami that if they could get, fortunately, anywhere close to half capacity by the end of the season, I think that's more than enough.
Sure. And some of you can make the argument that maybe they shouldn't have any fans in any stadium. Number one, to have a uniform set of rules, and number two, to be extra careful, because again, the priority should not be having fans in the stands, but taking care of dealing with this pandemic as best and as
By the way, do
possible.
they spread out the tickets when they do that? Like, they don't sell it, make sure that, okay, well, we're going to put 500 people all within the same section. I mean, it appears that they spread it all out.
Correct. They do it. They do social distancing as much as they can. I mean, they obviously keep the groups who have bought their tickets together,
Sure.
but there's no like, you won't see like one section be completely filled.
Is the only then issue would be what, the concession stands, things of that nature, where, well, nothing you can do if they all get together and group together, then
No. What they don't do, they're not doing that. They're doing everything electronically, where they bring the concessions to the
Very
seats.
nice. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
I-
No, they. I will say this: they have done within having the fans that they do have at the stadium, the Dolphins, and I'm assuming it's
Mhm.
everywhere. The same for those who do have fans, is they've done a very good job of making sure that we're going to minimize the risk of having those fans in there.
All right, sounds good. Well, at least we have football, and we have to be thankful for that. So, so far so good for Miami. At least getting a win. It's a young team. It's not necessarily about this year, but it's a rebuilding process. It takes time, and who knows? Maybe by the end of the season, we'll even be talking about Tua.
Who knows? And if they beat Seattle and get themselves a 2-2,
that changes everything.
who? Yeah, exactly. Who knows if we're not starting to think about, well, let's see what, because if you look at their schedule, and I know Brian Flores would kill me for doing that, but here's the thing: is after Seattle, they go play at San Francisco, which very well could be without Jimmy
True.
Garoppolo and without a whole bunch of different players. Then they play at Denver, whose quarterback is either Brett Rippon, Jeff Driscoll, or Blake Bortles.
We'll find out on Thursday.
Correct. So again, I mean,
you get the Jets back to back.
You get the Jets back to back. Here's the thing: is logically, as you mentioned, this year is about establishing a foundation for years to come. But there's also no ceiling in saying that, well, it can't happen. Who knows? Because the truth is, we still don't know just how good this Miami Dolphins team can be this year. We just don't know.
And that's what.
Because again, no, because I was going to say is they didn't look very good against New England in the opener at all. And even then, they were trailing 14-11 at one point in the fourth quarter. Against Buffalo, they got smoked by Josh Allen, and yet they still had a chance to win the fourth quarter. And then they pretty much handled what is a really bad Jacksonville team. So, I mean, how good are the Dolphins? We just don't know yet.
But you do get the feeling, you feel real strongly that they've got the right head coach, and that's extremely important. And that they are kind of, you can sense that they're building something. And if all goes well health-wise, they've got, hopefully, their franchise quarterback in the waiting, whether he plays this year or not. There's a lot to be excited about if you're a Miami Dolphin fan.
No, correct. And fans being what they are, patience is not exactly a gift that most fans possess.
No, they don't.
They're going to want to happen. Yeah, they're going to want it to happen now and now and now. And logic says this year is too early. But again, when does logic ever factor into what happens in the NFL?
It rarely does. All right, Alan, thanks a lot. And also, by the way, SI, Maven, AllDolphins, and then, of course, Dolphin Digest. Just quickly, if anybody wants to read about the Dolphins, both sources, what do? They can probably go to your Twitter page at a Poupart Fins, right?
Yeah, absolutely. To read my stuff I should say my stories and my brilliant analysis on the Sports Illustrated site, you go to si.com/NFL/Dolphins. And for those who want to subscribe to Dolphin Digest, the 800 number is 1-800-932-4557. Let me do it again since I botched it up. 1-800-932-4557.
Well, we'll have that on the ticker next week. If you emailed that to me.
That would help.
All right, Alan. Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you next Tuesday and every Tuesday throughout the 2020 season.
Absolutely. Talk to you next week.